Donald Trump just committed the single most corrupt act in American history?
What we're talking about is nothing short of the sitting president of the United States looting from the Treasury for his own gain.
It's been very well received.
Earlier this year, Donald Trump sued the IRS, that's the US equivalent of HMRC, over the unauthorised release of his tax records during his first term. The whistleblower who leaked them is currently serving 5 years in prison, but that's not enough for Trump. No, he sued the IRS for $10 billion over the leak, and that's surprising for two reasons. One, because it's a non-serious Dr. Evil amount of money, way more than their operating budget. The other, because as president, Donald Trump is in charge of the IRS and the Justice Department who represents them. He's literally on both sides of the case. Now, the judge in the case has noticed this and gave him until this week to come up with an explanation for how they're actually in opposition. But with just days to go before the judge threw out the case for being ridiculous, they decided to settle out of court. That's right, Donald Trump and a government department controlled by Donald Trump have settled out of court for $1.7 billion. Now, he's previously argued he isn't siphoning money out of the US Treasury and picking the pockets of hard-working Americans to enrich himself because he'd give the money to charity.
I'm going to give 100% to charity.
Which doesn't actually make it a lot better. But in any case, he isn't doing that anymore. Now the plan is to create a $1.7 billion fund to pay out compensation to people who Trump thinks were wronged by the Justice Department after his first term. That includes people who were convicted of crimes related to the January 6th insurrection, including people who were violently assaulting police officers and were pardoned by Trump on his first day back in office.
So this is January 6th, and these are the hostages for a party.
Shalom, back again with another lesson. Before I begin this lesson, I'd like to begin by giving all honor, glory, and praises unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak Wadash. I want to give double honors to my elders and apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone, who rule well, where I've learned this truth from. I want to say peace and salutations to Yakim, you brothers out there laboring, pushing this word out in all truth and in sincerity, presenting your bodies as a living sacrifice, which is your reasonable service. I want to say shalom to you Akwaf, meaning you Israelite sisters that may be listening, and also to you Israelites that are scattered across the four corners of the earth. You may look like these other nations, but your seed line goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is the chosen seed line. Shalom. So in this lesson, I'll briefly speak on the recent revelation that Donald Trump has decided to do, which is to award the protesters of the January 6, 2021 Capitol riots with a $1.8 billion reparation fund, right? Which is taxpayer funded, meaning it's not coming out of Donald Trump's pocket, it's coming out of the government or the taxpayers' pockets, right? So it's the taxpayer that's going to pay for this. Now, let's be honest, it's no surprise to us really that this is what was getting ready to happen, right? You know, it don't surprise me anymore. Anything that Donald Trump does doesn't shock me, right? So what we're calling reparations, you know, Donald Trump has decided to call it something different. I believe it's the name of anti-weaponization fund, which is, you know, which was created as part of a legal settlement to resolve a $10 billion IRS leak of his tax records, right? His tax report. Now, with when the court case, because I think he also went after CNN, if I'm not mistaken. He went after CNN, but nothing came of it because they tried to say it was defamation, but they ruled it as not being defamation. So he didn't get any settlement or payment from that. Now, with the IRS, the judge that had the court case is looking at the case thinking $10 billion to the IRS. The IRS doesn't carry that kind of money. They're not going to have that. So he's basically going to sink the IRS, which obviously is not going to happen. So they were getting ready to throw that case out of the court basically and dismiss it. However, instead, the IRS, if I'm not mistaken, decided to settle out of court for the $1.77 billion, right? Which is the amount that we're talking about right now, right? So when Donald Trump decided to settle out of court, right, he didn't receive a direct payout, right? Because if you remember, he was on the plane or Air Force One, and he was speaking with reporters, and they were telling him, well, what do you plan on doing with that money if you win? He said, I'll probably donate it to charity. Obviously, that never happened because you can't trust anything that this devil says, right? But either way, right, Donald Trump agreed to drop the lawsuit in exchange for certain benefits. Now, certain benefits that he was asking for was an apology from the IRS for leaking his tax report, something to do with his family, where the IRS can't go after his family or himself, right? And there was a few other benefits that he basically laid out.
Mikey breaking in from the edit to point out that it's actually got worse. Since I filmed this, they've added a bit that says the IRS is banned from investigating or auditing Trump's taxes or those of his family forever. I'm not kidding. It actually says the word forever twice.
One of the main benefits that he wanted to do was exchange to allow the rioters of the January 6, 2021 Capitol riots to receive compensation, right? Or to have individuals claim that were victims of the political targeting during the Donald Trump first term, right? To receive reimbursement.
Put the scale of this into perspective for a minute. Cast your minds back to January, when a fraud case about people siphoning taxpayers' cash out of social services funds prompted a violent invasion of Minnesota by ICE agents and the deaths of 2 innocent American citizens. And also YouTubers getting millions of views by harassing children's centres and demanding they show us where the kids are. The amount of fraud identified in that case? About $1.1 billion. Trump's slush fund is going to be $1.776 billion. And even that figure's a dog whistle that tells you what he's really doing here. 1776 was the year of the American Revolution. This is Trump telling January 6thers, the people who battered police officers with sticks while trying to overturn the result of a legitimate election, that they are patriots. This is Trump telling people, if you commit crimes for me, you will not only not face punishment, you will be rewarded. If you, like me, believe Trump has no intention of leaving the White House at the end of his term, this doesn't just look like corruption. It could be something far, far worse.
Now, there's a scripture that says, can an Ethiopian change his skin or a leopard change his spots? Roughly paraphrasing. We're going to start in that scripture now first to begin with, right? So when we look in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 13, right? And if you go down to verse 23, it says, can an Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? It says, then may ye also do good that are accustomed to do evil, right? Now, during this time, right, during the time of Jeremiah, the Israelites were so accustomed to being wicked and going off and doing all kinds of idolatry and all kinds of things, right, that he was saying that the chances of them doing good is like a leopard changing his spots, right? Or an Ethiopian his skin. Because it's rhetorical, because it's never going to happen, right? And you could even equate that to, can an Edomite change being not being a devil? And that's absolutely not. You can never stop the devil from being the devil, right? He's always going to be who he is, right? So as we continue on, we're going to read in the book of Malachi. We're going to go to the book of Malachi next, right? And this is the first chapter, right? So Malachi 1, it says, the Most High's love for Jacob, because that's who the Lord loves. The Lord don't like these Edomites, right? Now, this is Malachi chapter 1, verse 1. It says, the burden of the word of the Lord, Yahweh, to Israel by Malachi. Verse 2, I have loved you, saith the Lord Yahweh. Yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother? Saith the Lord Yahweh. Yet I loved Jacob, and I hated Esau. And that's the concrete proof right there that the Lord ain't dealing with these Edomites. The Lord don't love these Edomites, right? And that's why these Edomites are so angry, right? It's because the Lord don't love them, And it says they didn't get the blessing, right? And you could read that in the book of Genesis, the 25th chapter onwards, about the story of Jacob and Esau, right? Chapter 27 is where Esau receives his blessing, which is a sword, right? That's why these devils are all hell-bent on murder and war, right? Now, it says, verse 3, I'll start verse 3 again. It says, and I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Now, these Edomites, when the Israelites, let's say, for example, the Israelites, whenever they went off, the Lord always, put them in captivity. They cried out to the Lord, and the Lord restored them and put them back in their place and helped rebuild them back up. These Edomites, they've never had that treatment from the Lord because the Lord don't like them, So where it says, and I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste, he was cast out, He was cast out of the lands, right? He was broken spiritually. He was cast out of the lands. He was made to be nothing, right? But he's obviously he's a prideful devil, right? So it says, and I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Verse 4 says, whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, meaning they're spiritually broken. Their prideful spirit is broken on them, right? It says, and this is the pride of the Edomites, right? So it says, whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, right? Worn out, but we will return and build the desolate places. So we're going to come back and we're going to rebuild stronger. Like, make America great again. This is what they say, right? It says, thus saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, right? Because the Lord's going to throw them down, right? They ain't building again, right? It says, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, which is the habitation of where all the wickedness is, which is America, the border of wickedness, where evil and wickedness is in that place, right? It says, and the people against whom the Lord Yahweh have indignation forever, that righteous anger. The Lord is angry at these people. And you see why. You see all the trickery they do. They're just proud people and wicked people, right? So I'll read that from the top all the way through. So this is the book of Malachi, chapter 1, verse 4. It says, whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord, Yahweh of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down. And they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord Yahweh have indignation forever. Indignations forever, meaning, after this go around, as this kingdom falls, they ain't coming back. The Lord is done with them. They're wicked, right? Full stop. You remember when Donald Trump first came into power, right? He had most people convinced that he was the right man for the job, that he was going to do all these things, bring all these promises, bring the economy back on track, get America back to its former glory, and nothing that he said that he was going to do has come to pass. The only thing that he's managed to do is embolden these racists, these white supremacists, to speak out against Jake instead of going after the Epstein class, which is the ones that's ruling this world, right? You can see that America's interests have been cast aside for them other people, with the hat smalls, and I have to be careful with what I say because my videos have been flagged recently. But anyway, those people, right? That's who's in control of Babylon, aka America, right now, right? They're the ones that's ruling it, and people know it, right? You had all these people, especially these so-called black people, standing next to Trump, hugging him, and he's about to screw you over. You didn't even get reparations before the slaves than his people did. His people got the reparations first, which is crazy to me. But again, that's our people. They want to keep hugging on the devil and loving on the devil, thinking the devil's going to change, but he ain't, right? So as I continue on, I'm going to read, because there are reparations coming, all right? And it's going to be reparations for the hopeful elect, the Israelites, right? Now, let's go to the book of Psalms. And we're going to read in the book of 55, Psalm 55, and we're going to read verse 21. And it says, actually, let me start at verse 20. Yeah, we'll start at verse 20, right? So it says, this is Psalms 55 and 20. He says, he hath put forth his hand against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant. So everybody that was at peace with this devil realizes that this devil ain't straight. He ain't upright. You know what I mean? I think you read that in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, verse 4 and onwards, right? His soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, roughly paraphrasing, right? As we continue reading, right? Verse 21, it says, the words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. Now, everywhere this man goes on planet Earth, he goes to destroy, to kill, to disrupt, to steal, all these things. Every land that you see these Americans, these Edomites in, they're up to no good. They're stealing something, They tell the people, oh yeah, we're doing this for you. We're going to make this country better. But no, they've made it worse. The country is 10 times worse than it ever was, right? That's why the people are starting to realize that he is the border of wickedness. That's where wickedness comes from, is Babylon. These people, these Edomites. Now, because you've got our people freaking struggling out there, right? So this is verse 22. It says, cast thy burden upon the Lord Yahweh, and he shall sustain thee, right? Because that's what we got to rely on in these times. We got to rely on the Lord, because it's about to get ugly out here, right? It says, he shall never suffer the righteous to be moved, right? You see, it's clear as day. Verse 23, it says, but thou, O power, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee. Right? So that's that point that I wanted to reach on in the book of Psalm 55. Right? So as we continue, we're just going to bring out a few more scriptures, and then we're going to close it out there. But this is in the book of Exodus. Right? So we're going to go to Exodus chapter 21. I'm going to read in verse 16, right? Because it says, and he that this is Exodus chapter 21, verse 16. It says, and he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. So these Edomites, were still found in their hand, and now they're about to make these draconian laws against us, right? So the Lord is getting ready to put these people to death, man. Like, this is the ultimate judgment that the Lord's got prepared for these people. It's because they deserve nothing less, right? Now, as we continue reading, because I got more scriptures, right? This is the book of Second Thessalonians, chapter 1, and we're going to read verse 6, right? Because some people may say, well, that's not fair. That's not fair. You're going to kill off a whole nation of people because of something their forefathers did. Well, unfortunately for you, the Lord don't see it like that, right? Second Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 6 says, seeing it is a righteous thing with the Most High to recompense tribulation to them that trouble you. Now, these Edomites, they have a recompense coming their way, right? Because you got these proud devils, claiming this reparations, and they're doing it before the so-called blacks received their reparations. We still ain't received so much as a thank you or apology. Nothing, right? Because they're too proud. These devils are too proud that they'd rather give money to criminals that try to break into the Capitol building, and take it by force under the command of Donald Trump, right? But again, they'll continue to lie every step of the way because this is what they do. They're liars. That's what a deceiver is, right? So I'm going to read in the book of Isaiah, chapter 60, verse 10. It says, and the sons of strangers shall build up thy walls. Now this is going into your reparations that they're going to be given to the elect of Israel, the Israelites, right? When they're building up the kingdom. It says, and the sons of strangers shall build up thy walls, and their kings shall minister unto thee. For in my wrath I smote thee, but in my favor I have had mercy on thee. Right? So if you think about how we were during the time of Jeremiah, the Israelites were wicked, consistently wicked, right? So with them being wicked, one of the things that I mentioned before is that anytime the Israelites were wicked, they would go into captivity. The Lord would raise up an army against them and they would go into captivity. The Israelites would then cry out to their power, to our Heavenly Father, and that Yahweh would then raise up people, or raise up a person to lead the Israelites out of captivity, to put them back in their place, to restore them, only for them to go over and over and over again with that, right? However, it was never like that with these Edomites, right? It's only that way for the Israelites. That's why it says here, for in my wrath I smote thee, but in my favor have I had mercy on thee, right? So the Lord is continuously having mercy on the Israelites, right? So when we go to verse 11, it says, therefore thy gates shall be opened continually, meaning the gates are not going to be closed, right? They're going to be continuously open because all these other nations are going to be flowing into it, giving us their resources, coughing up all them goods, right? Because you're going to be giving them reparations back. That's how the Lord looks at the reparations and how they're coming back to the Israelites, right? It says, therefore thy gates shall be open continually, they shall not be shut day nor night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, meaning their riches, the best of their goods, so the best fabrics, the best spices, the best gold, everything, right? It says, and that their kings may be brought. It says, for the nation and kingdom that will not serve thee shall perish. Yea, those nations shall be utterly wasted. Right? So any nation that don't want to serve and pay tribute to the Israelites when the kingdom is established on earth, guess what, buddy? It's gonna be a bad time for you. You know what I mean? It's gonna be bad days, right? So I've pretty much made my point here. So I'm gonna close it up. I want to give all honor, glory, and praises unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Recha Kodash. Double honors to my elders and apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well, who I've learned this truth from. I want to say peace and salutations to you hopeful elect out there. And again, it's on to the next lesson, Lord willing. Shalom.